Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome aboard. Wherever you are, whatever your time zone, this is AI Talk, and I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. Today, we will be discussing the topic of getting the best value from Gen AI. Now, look, according to McKinsey, 70% of businesses are already investing in Gen AI. And this means that it's essential for all businesses today to understand how to leverage Gen AI in order to remain competitive. So in today's session, we'll cover three areas to help you unlock the full potential of Gen AI in your business. First, we'll dive into estimating the costs of implementing Gen AI and how to plan for the investment. Next, we'll explore where Gen AI can provide the most value in your operations, ensuring that you're focusing on the right areas. And finally, we'll discuss the topic of doing nothing, why delaying adoption could mean falling behind. In the end, we hope that you'll have some clear insights on how to harness Gen AI to drive growth and efficiency in your businesses. But before I introduce our guest today, I want to say thank you to everyone attending today, and that includes folks that are joining us live on LinkedIn. Hello. And to everyone joining us today on Zoom. Thank you all for being here today. It should be a great discussion, but I do want to say that I want to hear from you too. I'd like to encourage everyone attending today to participate. So please join in with your comments in the chat section if you have a question along the way. Just jump on in. I will attempt to get some of your questions into the flow of the show today. And we'll also have a few minutes available at the end for your questions today. All right, let's jump right on in with our great panel of guests, starting with Dalmo Cerne, Senior Manager of Machine Learning and Engineering at Workday. Dalmo, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from?
Hello, Kevin. It's great to be here and joining this conversation. I am based in Denver, Colorado, but today I'm calling from California. I'm attending a company meeting over here. So the
Very
background,
good.
hotel room.
Welcome aboard, Dalmo. It's great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Also joining us today is Alvaro Silva Santisteban, AI Solutions Lead at Google. Alvaro, where are you calling in from?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm based out of London. Today I'm calling out of Riyadh. So I work with a lot of customers in. Looking forward to this.
All right, very good. Alvaro, welcome aboard. Thank you so much. And also with us today is Matt Lewis, CEO, founder, and Chief Augmented Intelligence Officer at LL Mental. Matt, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from today? Hello, Matt.
Sorry. Thanks, Kevin. So happy to be here. I'm calling in from New York, just in Westchester County, north of the city, and happy to be here with everyone and chatting today.
Nice, nice. All right. Well, gentlemen, welcome aboard. Thank you so much for being with us today. Let's get our session started today. And to do that, I'd like to draw our attention to an article published recently by Search Engine Journal titled DeepSeek and its impact on the generative AI global race. Now, DeepSeek, as most people or many people may know, is a Chinese AI chatbot that is rapidly challenging established models like ChatGPT by offering faster and more effective services. Its open its open source approaches led to widespread adoption, but despite its growing popularity, concerns have been raised about its accuracy. It failed 83% of New Guard's tests and often promotes government positions. Additionally, security vulnerabilities and censorship issues have been identified. But look, DeepSeek's rise signifies China's growing influence in the global AI landscape, and it is prompting concerns and discussions about AI ethics, security, and international competition. I'm wondering what the panel thinks about this article. Dalmo, what are your thoughts on the article, and what are your thoughts on DeepSeek?
Uh, you mentioned about the article or the DeepSeek coming from China. And I would say the concern is less about being coming from China and more having influence from the Chinese government. That's I think is where the crucial point is.
Mhm.
But because it's open source, the model, it can be changed. The weight of the model can be changed. It can be altered. So it can be those influences, those participations of the Chinese government can be removed from the model. But I think there's a deeper thing over there for us to consider is one is geopolitical one. The fact that the US and the Western world in general thought it was ahead in the technology race than it actually is. So that's a good question to be debated. Are we far ahead? Are we not? Are the Chinese government and other governments catching up? And the other one is about GPU manufacturers. NVIDIA comes to mind. Like, do we need as many GPUs as we originally thought we needed? Do we need fewer GPUs? That's one big question to ask. But there's one upside for that, which is with more competition among providers, especially if being open source, customers in the end, they have more options, they have more choice. So that could be an upside for that.
Now, Alvaro, you're with Google AI Solutions Lead. What's your feeling on the impact of DeepSeek? To me, the open source is the biggest impact really for developers. And as Dalmo mentioned, the lower reliance on GPU power. What are your thoughts on the impact? Are you with us? You may be muted, Alvaro. There you go.
Yeah. Let me know if you can hear me okay. So for me, I would echo.
Alvaro, you seem to be freezing up. Is that about right? Yeah, looks like
Yes.
Alvaro, you may be freezing up here. I'm going to allow you to touch base with Russell in the background, and we'll move on. We'll come back to you. How's that sound? Matt, what are your impressions of the article and the rise of DeepSeek? What are your thoughts on the open source part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those perennial questions in the generative AI space that will continue to be kind of engaged with across the enterprise and in the popular press for some time. Should it be a closed model? Should it be open source? Is there both end kind of consideration? And as my colleagues are pointing out, I think we need to think broadly, not just about the kind of source of where these models are coming from, but also like the intentions of why they're being put into the discourse, if you will. There is some geopolitical considerations at play. It is kind of odd / concerning / interesting that DeepSeek kind of came into the American sphere right at the exact same time that the TikTok conversations were happening about being banned in this country. And there's some discussion about is there a reason why the Chinese government needed to have some kind of consideration out in the broader ecosystem of the U.S. to have access to intelligence and information beyond what DeepSeek can directly contribute to the AI landscape. And I think those are worth interrogating and exploring more broadly. And I think as we now learn more about DeepSeek and the model and how it was actually built, it certainly wasn't architected for the $5 million, $6 million that it was first indicated as. Certainly, maybe some fraction of what the organizations that we know in the closed environments are capable of, like in OpenAI or other areas, if you will. But certainly not 1/1000th, if you will, as they were first making it out to be. I think what it does though is that for CIOs, for CTOs, for enterprise leaders across any of the established verticals that we all work with and across, it creates this kind of like uncertainty and a need to respond. It's gone are the days 10, 15, 20 years ago when we could have a really kind of tight controlled strategy within and across the business and you go home and kind of live our lives, if you will. Now AI is in the drinking water. It's it's out there in the world, and there's really no rest for the weary, so to speak. Like you're always like exposed to something happening in the world and need to respond quite quickly, because if you don't, your staff, your colleagues, your employees are literally on the App Store downloading DeepSeek onto their phones, and there is this shadow IT consideration going on. They're using it for work purposes, whether they're supposed to or not, and it creates a real consternation across the business. So the need for agility and to be able to have an informed opinion in leadership is more necessary now than it ever has been, and it creates a a real concern for both for leadership but also for the business, because in many spaces like in the regulated industries where I work in healthcare and life sciences, it creates an appetite of risk where people could do things out of not, ignorance really more than anything. They're trying to experiment, they're trying to learn, and they create a situation that could put the patient's harm at risk, where they could make a decision that's not intentional, if you will. So it just adds like another element to the overall discourse that is sometimes not completely helpful.
All right, and Alvaro, you are back with us again. Welcome back. What are your thoughts on the article?
Yeah, happy to give it another go. Let's see, hopefully it works this time. So for me, like 4 really interesting call outs. Firstly, the fact, and I think this is echoed by some of the other speakers, but the fact that it's an open source model provider that is now on par with some closed source providers. So for me, in terms of performance, that's quite interesting, how far open source providers are willing to go to either build an ecosystem, create a brand, create a bit of a splash. I do have questions as to how sustainable that is going forward. How much can labs really afford to invest, whatever it takes to invest, and then be on par with private source models? Question mark for me how that moves on. Secondly, the optimization of training costs. So I think what's really interesting about DeepSeek is that they were able to achieve a little bit more with the little resources that they had. So for me, that's good progress in terms of using doing more with less in terms of GPU resource. That being said, I think some of the initial claims around the costs weren't really apple-to-apple comparisons. Nonetheless, when you look at the breakdown of costs, there are some advances in optimization, which I think are quite promising. A third, and this wasn't explicitly mentioned in the article, but one of the interesting things for me about DeepSeek and what they released is the fact that they shared one approach that doesn't require human involvement for tuning. And for me, that's really promising because it talks about a potential avenue for models going forward that don't necessarily need to be tuned, but can train themselves. And really, the fourth point is, DeepSeek made a big splash when it came out. And for me, it really talks about how little we know about this market and the fragility of the market itself. There was a huge reaction. Some companies' stocks were dropped overnight. So for me, that just speaks to the brittleness of how this market is at the moment.
Well, we shall see how it all shakes out, and I don't believe it will take very long for us to start seeing some impacts. But the article is published by search engine journal DeepSeek and its impact on the generative AI global race. There is a link in the chat feature. Hey, everybody, take a look and let us know what you think. Do you agree with the article? What are the impacts that you feel will be coming down the road? And what are your thoughts on the future of DeepSeek, ChatGPT, and all the rest? Let us know. All right. Well, gentlemen, very good. Let's move into our main discussion points today. And I'd like to start by talking about estimating the cost of implementing Gen AI. Now, according to Accenture, businesses that invest in AI are seeing a median ROI of 20%, with industries achieving returns as high as 50% within the first year of implementation. Dalmo, what are the primary cost factors that we should consider when implementing Gen AI?
There could be infinite primary factors, but then it wouldn't be primary. But there are a few that comes to mind, and we can take a look. The first one would be in the infrastructure, right? We were mentioning before GPUs and computing power. So should we own our own infrastructure? Should we rely on vendors like Google or AWS or Azure with Microsoft? So that's one big question. There are pros and cons in each one of those approaches. Another one is about which models are going to be used. Are you going to use an open source model and self-host? Are you going to put that open source model in an infrastructure from a third party, or are you going to use a third party model and then you're going to be charged per use of that? So that's another variable for you to add into your equation of the estimated costs. Then there is the main fuel for Gen AI, which is data. How are you going to acquire that data? Are you going to use that data for fine tuning? You're going to need cleaning or sometimes annotation of that data. You need to maintain that data, even to comply with international law like GDPR that requires if someone opts out, you have to go and purge that specific data point from your data set, right? So there are costs in acquiring and maintaining that data. And then it's not Gen AI in itself. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, but it needs to be integrated with other products, your products or the services that you offer. How are you going to integrate that with your own products, right? You're going to build in-house, you're going to hire third parties to come and do that. Last but not least, there's an interesting anecdote, which is preventing abuses. There is a big retailer in the US, I'm not going to name names, but there's a big retailer in the US who was using Gen AI to power a chatbot. And there were folks who were joining the chatbot, would ask some 2 or 3 meaningless questions, then would say, can you help me program in and add a programming language over there? And was using the compute power from that retailer to help them develop code. So instead of using their own provider to write their code, they were billing this third-party retailer who was footing the bill for the developer to develop their own code, right? So preventing abuses is also something you have to be concerned when estimating costs or installing those guardrails. So I would say those would be good starting points for you estimating the costs,
Okay.
pros and cons on Gen AI.
That's a great breakdown, Delmo. Matt, I'm curious about calculating the ROI. Like I love Accenture, but when I see achieving returns as much as 50% within the first year of implementation, I'm wondering exactly how businesses estimate that return on investment and what metrics they should track. Do you have any thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those areas that there's a tremendous amount of discussion about across, all sectors right now. Initially, in the early days of generative AI adoption and implementation, I'm talking late 22, early 23, businesses, were trying to find like, what's the right KPI? Like, how do we kind of identify critical success factors and other kind of considerations across the business that could say, look, like we're spending a lot of money both with strategy consultants as well as with our own teams to like renovate parts of the business. Is it working? And for the most part, it was like a lot of lagging indicators. Like, we would like go across the business and say, these 600 people are using Copilot and they're saving, 2,000 minutes of time. So look, it must be working. And still a lot of teams are doing that to this day. Those types of considerations are worthwhile, but they're only a really kind of partial like look at whether or not the business is really becoming more efficient, because you start seeing people across the different parts of the organization really adjust their workflows, be able to work in a more augmented fashion, do things differently that they couldn't do pre-generative. They start changing how they interact with customers, how they work with colleagues, generating content, being able to do things that weren't possible previously, and 30, 40, 50% of their work is materially different than it was before. And all of a sudden they have a different job. And you see that a large portion of the organization is doing different work than they were doing in late 22. And now it's a completely different organization. And as a result, this is really where we're looking at impact. It's like, how does the organization fully adopt and integrate and transform pre-post generative AI so that it is a more transformed, more innovative, and more impactful organization than it was before. I think some groups, though, are not seeing this because they're solving a lot of the wrong problems. They're, kind of going to, either their internal teams or going to consultants or going to, the external market, and they're saying like, what, show me some use cases, like try to, come to me and tell me what I should be solving. And that's not a great place to start with generative AI. Like most organizations should look at what their key kind of strategic platforms are, their pillars that they're trying to achieve in the external market, and look at generative AI more as like something to be juxtaposed on top of their strategy to help amplify or extend or enhance what they can do to make their own plans work better, faster, cheaper, more, kind of assertively, if you will. And, then they'll see that impact that you're asking about.
Oh, those are great points, Matt. Now, Alvaro, you're AI solutions lead with Google. You work with companies of all kinds. What do you see are common mistakes that companies make when budgeting for Gen AI, and what should they do to avoid that?
No, that's a really good question. I think maybe one area that is not often accounted for are all the people costs that are often hidden. So Matt touched on that and around rethinking processes, rethinking how adoption is a factor for some of these solutions. So some costs, for instance, that aren't really accounted for are things like enablement, or costs needed to rethink and redesign business processes. And these costs can often be explicit and implicit, right? Like sometimes you'll need to hire a Gen AI evangelist or bring in AI talent to be able to do something. But often it will be your existing workforce that you need to educate, upskill, and then reorganize. And there's hidden costs around that that are often not measured. Likewise, I find it that the decision factor between a pay-as-you-go type of model or like out of the box versus really classic dilemma of buy versus build really changes the certainty around the costs. So for instance, if whatever technology you're adopting, think SaaS or license type of software, then you pay per seat, and so that's relatively straightforward to forecast. Whereas if you're doing pay as you go, it's based on adoption, based on use, based on different metrics that are a bit more difficult to estimate. So I'm seeing maybe some uncertainty in budgeting in those two areas.
Matt, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think what Alvaro said is brilliant. I mean, I think there is, kind of an open, like the open secret of generative AI adoption and impact is really the humans, like the people of AI, not just the human in the loop considerations that are necessary for training models and ensuring accuracy. But it is really the reality that even if you do all your best work on digital dexterity and help people understand how to prompt and understand the skills in the workforce, if you don't prepare the kind of the ground for what's going to be fertilized, if you will, in the future, there's a tremendous amount of hesitancy and resistance to AI in the actual enterprise. And ultimately, this is why we see these 70-80% failure rates across the verticals with AI adoption. And I think this earlier discussion Alvaro mentioned about building and buy is essential, but I think it's also really important for leadership to really think about what type of organization are we now, and what type of organization do we want to be in 2031? Like, not every organization should be building generative AI technology. Like there are some organizations that are really strong, say from a professional services standpoint, or really great in retail, or really great in telecoms. They might be wonderful in that regard if they partner with a Google or partner with a AWS or an OpenAI in the future. But to build now in this environment is very risky, not just because it's new, but because the environment is changing so fast that to build a piece of technology in February 2025 that may not be complete and actually live in market until maybe June, July 2025. By then, the models will have completely upgraded to whatever comes next. And unless you have a completely robust, experienced team that can evolve with them, you get what the field is now referring to as generative anxiety, where people are really so like losing sleep over the idea that they can't keep pace with the model evolution. It may not be what it was 20 years ago building SaaS platforms. You have to really think about this consideration of build, buy, and partner in the sense of who the enterprise wants to be when it's when it grows up, if you will, 5, 6, 7 years now. Is it really right for every organization to be building AI tech? I don't think so. Some organizations are better to be buying. Some are better to be partnering. Some make sense to build for sure, but not everyone.
Yeah, just wanted to add a quick thing over here. There may be a topic less popular and more controversial with this one is the mission of the company and adopting AI and the workforce. right? Because there will be some resistance over there, and there are going to be some tough decisions to be made
Okay.
when the workforce, if they want to adopt AI or resist to that. Those are going to be tough conversations,
Yeah.
and it's going to be controversial topics going forward with this. So you're going to leave that open, but something for everyone to think
All
about.
right. All right, well, gentlemen, I'd like to move on to our next discussion point. Look, I'm a process improvement guy. I want to know which processes I can apply Gen AI to that will make a difference. As you mentioned, Matt, not every process, not every organization really will benefit necessarily from Gen AI. So where? Now, according to McKinsey and Company, 50% of AI-driven transformations focus on improving business operations like supply chain or customer service, driving significant cost savings. But Matt, which business processes typically benefit most from Gen AI implementations and why?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there really are any interactions where a human thinks or has to make a decision where generative AI can't complement it in some way. It's just how much of it we're seeing now and how much of it we'll see in the future, honestly. People tend to think, though, in the enterprise of places where they spend the most money or where it costs them the most money. So, right now we're seeing the most examples and use cases and things that are customer facing or where there's the most spend internally. So from a customer facing standpoint, especially in healthcare and life sciences, it's like in the call centers, in like
Mm,
field sales, in places where you're coming into contact with patients. And for example, like in the call center where people, are contacting a doctor's line or a medical information line with a complaint about a medication they're taking, right now, historically, those types of interactions have been entirely manual. But you can think about what the workflow should look like, whether it's from a generative AI amplification standpoint or an agentic workflow, so that it's frictionless for the person on the other end of the line, the same way that you would ideally have an interaction with, an idealized interaction maybe with a luxury hospital, hotel, or with another kind of interaction that you have that is pleasurable, and so that you quickly get the answer that you're seeking for the condition you have, and that it's accessible 24/7, 365. You have a question at 1 o'clock in the morning, you can get an answer. Right now, most of these organizations, whether they're healthcare delivery side or life sciences side, they're not staffed like Friday at 1 o'clock in the morning, because there are people that need to pick up the phone and answer the call. And if the people aren't there, the question goes unanswered. So
mhm.
these things make sense in the old human-led world, but in the new augmented world in which we're walking into, there are better ways to serve the needs of the populace that are augmented by AI, not just by kind of like closing the loop with full-on customer service, but providing sentiment analysis, doing conversational AI, thinking about are we saying the right things to the right person in an empathic tone that supports them in their time of need, thinking about how do we optimize for hyper personalization so that each person is actually getting contextual information that makes sure that it helps them close the loop on the decisions they need to make.
Mhm.
There are so many things that are possible to do that complement humans' ability to provide relevant information, that the sky is really the limit in these
Yeah.
types of customer facing situations. But I don't think there is like a upper ceiling in terms of where generative AI can complement human potential, if you will. I think we're just really scratching the surface.
Alvaro, we have a question coming in here from Tony. Tony, thank you so much for your question today and your comment. I thought perhaps you could help us with, and Tony's asking which processes will benefit the least from Gen AI? Which processes are best left un Gen AI'd? Alvaro, do you have a thought for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very much centered around Matt's response as to, you know, what are the areas that benefit the most from Gen AI. And I think about Gen AI as a tool for augmenting human productivity in most cases. So for me, wherever there is the requirement for things like empathy, human relationship, complex decision making that involves those two skills, then I would leave that out of Gen AI. I think that should be human led. That being said, it doesn't mean that you can't equip those decisions with generative AI. So, like for instance, if a salesperson needs to make a decision with regards to their customer, that decision should be human led, empathy led, relationship led. but that human can be equipped with, a proposal for sales generated by AI, recommended services for their customer generated by AI. So I think it goes hand in hand where Gen AI can drive the most value, and how you shape the business process that is then human-led or empathy-led. So maybe I would start there. If I can add as well, I think we've talked about areas where the value of generative AI can be easily measured, or where it shouldn't necessarily play a role. But I think there are different avenues where we haven't really talked about, or we haven't really thought about where they can be applied. And this includes areas like cybersecurity, more advanced research and development, product innovation, et cetera, that can also be considered.
All right, very good. Now, Dalmo, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I'm going to take the other side of the argument over here. I would say that if you are a rebel, you should go against Gen AI, not in the automation of processes, but Gen AI is based on previous knowledge, right? It builds on everything that we know, but not what we don't know. It doesn't generate new knowledge. So creativity, explanatory knowledge, understanding, none of that comes from AI. That's a unique human trait. So not just thinking about process, but how about if you want to take down an existing process, replace with something else, or even not replace it at all, build something completely different? Those are all areas where humans exceed and should not be automated, should not be addressed by Gen AI, because you're not going to end up with anything new or anything better than what existed before. So that would be a great place to un-Gen AI.
Un-Gen AI. Okay.
Un-Gen AI system. That's a new word, right? So great. You can create something new.
And Matt, did you have something to add also?
Yeah, I mean, this not start Gen AI or not initiate Gen AI question is a great one, because like people are still trying to figure out like where do we use this, where do we use that. And I would say also like there are a lot of places where you could use Gen AI to do something, but you probably shouldn't. Like one place for that is like if you want the system to be able to give a specific response that is true always every time, you probably shouldn't use generative AI. You could do it, like you could turn the temperature all the way down. You could make it, really constrained so you only get that response. But like it's like using a shotgun when a slingshot would do the same trick, if you will. There's no point. And like examples of that are like, if you're in a clinical situation and you want a system to be able to return like a diagnosis to a patient, if you can train the model on all possible, results that might be relevant, but in order to get the one you want every time, it's like there are many other ways of doing that, and generative AI is not really great for that situation. And when people come back and say it's not accurate, it's not reliable, it's not supposed to be. That's not the point of generative. That's the word generate, is to generate things, if you will, not to kind of reliably reproduce the things that existed before. So, there are other ways of doing that, but that's not one use case that's really a great use of generative. And there are a lot of reasons why like you're not seeing in those situations where you need the kind of the same like response, say like that you pull from a spreadsheet or from a list, every time to be faithfully, indicated. That's not a good place necessarily for generative to be deployed.
All right. And Alvaro, you had one more thought?
Yeah, I wanted to also respond to one of the points Dalmo said, which I think is super interesting, which is around content creation and creativity. I find that point really interesting because, one, without humans creating the data, without human creation, you don't have AI, right? So there's a feedback loop that you need there to be able to generate things like images, videos, etc. That being said, I think there's a second point there, which is that AI can, at the moment, generate creative content such as videos, and it's constantly improving. It can generate images and create synthetic voice. So there is room to consider tiers of quality in that process. What I mean by that is that, for instance, I have a customer that this is a media platform for playing different sports content like football matches and soccer and so forth. And they usually hire commentators to, talk about what's going on during the match, etc. But they've got a mid tail and a long tail of content that they can't afford at the moment to hire commentators for. So what they're considering there is creating synthetic or Gen AI commentators to be able to do that. And this adds value because it's not really taking away anything that exists at the moment. It's matches that don't have anyone, or they're not able to hire someone that can talk to them. But now they would be able to with AI. I think the same is true once video technologies and video generation technologies get to a point where you can generate things like films or short series. There can be a tier, there can be a market for that sort of content creation. Yeah. But a big point is, who owns those rights, IP, the generation of data used to train those models, things like that.
Right, right. All right, we are here today with Dalmo Cerne, Senior Manager of Machine Learning Engineering at Workday, Alvaro Silva Santisteban, AI Solutions Lead at Google, and Matt Lewis, CEO, Founder, and Chief Augmented Intelligence Officer at LL Mental. Look, folks, if you have a question or a comment for our panel, now would be the time to pop it into the chat feature in the time that we have remaining, and we'll try to get some of your comments into the flow of our discussion here in just the next few minutes. In the time that we have left, gentlemen, I am wondering about your thoughts about the cost of doing nothing. Now, according to PwC, businesses that fail to adopt AI could see a 10% loss in market share over the next 5 years as competitors leverage automation and efficiency improvements. Again, I like to sort of challenge the statistics that we see. Dalmo, from your perspective, what are the key risks in delaying Gen AI adoption today?
It's all relative to the market where you are operating, right? You're gonna, without any use of AI in general, not just Gen AI, but there's gonna be a more costly and inefficient use of analyzing the data and coming up with some insights from that. A big question is, you don't operate in a market in a vacuum. There are competitors, that are other people over there operating in the same space. Are they using AI effectively? In the end of the day, you need to serve your customer base effectively. If you're not serving them effectively, be that with the use of Gen AI, be that with the use of other technologies, then the competition may be using that and they're going to come and eat your lunch. Right? So if you are slower at implementing innovation, you're going to be, one, losing market share to your competition, but more importantly, you're going to be losing customers because you're going to be serving them with a subpar product.
Alvaro, do you agree that companies can lose market share potentially? What is the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah, I agree. And I think in some cases, it can be quite dramatic. There's the point that Dalmo mentioned around improved productivity, improved efficiency, and that can translate to price, it can translate to speed, so better value proposition for the end consumers. But in some cases, it's quite dramatic. For instance, I'm working with a couple of legal firms where they have to process large amounts of documents at scale and charge very high fees for doing so. But now there's a technology that's come up, generative AI, that can do that at scale and kind of to a high degree of quality. So the fear there is, very high degree of disruption to that business model. And in that case, it can be quite transformational, and you could really miss out if they don't adopt those technologies successfully. So I think definitely there's missing out on productivity gains, efficiencies, but there's then also missing out on transformational disruptive forces, depending on the business model, depending on the processes and things like that.
And Matt, do you agree? I guess it all depends on the business. What is the cost of doing nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Peter Diamandis, former chairman of the X Prize and runs Singularity University out on the West Coast, says there are only really two choices. Like, businesses can fully adopt generative AI by the end of the decade, or they won't exist. So I think this 10% quote is like a strong underestimate, if you will. In businesses that are strongly people-led, like healthcare, professional services, life sciences, if you will. Like it's really like a battle for hearts and minds. Like you have to really think about like where people are, how you can augment their capabilities, their intelligence, how they're going to partner with the machines running forward, if you will, together, or risk being outcompeted by those that do. There really is no other choice. Like it's really like an existential thing at this point. And hopefully, our listeners and those out in the broader ecosystem will make that choice to progress forward and help people that are in need.
Mm. Well, Dalmo, Alvaro, Matt, it's been great speaking with you today. Where has our time gone? Before I let you go, I would like to ask each of you if you have one quick action item that you can give our listeners for our listeners to take advantage of your ideas and advice. Dalmo, do you have an action item for us today?
Yeah, so the investment in Gen AI is an upfront cost. So one thing you should do is establish a budget budget cap, right? You can spend a lot more money than you intended to from the beginning.
Alvaro, how about you? Do you have an action item for us today?
Absolutely. So I would ask the audience, if they haven't done this already, to go away, pick one aspect of their personal life that can be affected by generative AI, and pick a tool to do something about it. And there's many tools out there. There's Gemini, there's deep research, there's a lot that can be done to impact your personal life. And I think that will give everyone a really good idea as to how it can impact everything around them in terms of personal life, business processes, and so forth. So I think that will really fuel growth for them and for their environment.
Very good. And Matt, how about you? Do you have an action item for us today?
I literally was going to say the exact thing that Alvaro said, so now I have to come up with something else on the spot. So what I would say in addition to that's exactly what I would have said. So kudos to you, Alvaro. But the thing that I would say second is that people should really think about where they want to be. If they're leaders in the business, they're executives, they're senior enterprise folks, where they think their company should be in 2029, and whether what they're doing now with enterprise generative AI can get them there, and what needs to change in order to articulate that. And if you're not a leader in the business and you want to be, or you want to still be in the same space, what you need to do for your career, whether it's about upskilling or making sure that your mental health is where it needs to be able to partner with AI so that you can progress forward into the days that follow. This is the time to do that. Take an hour, take the week, whatever, to reflect on that. There's no time like the present.
That is Matt Lewis, CEO and founder and Chief Augmented Intelligence Officer at LL Mental. Matt, thank you for being with us. Also, Alvaro Silva Santisteban, AI Solutions Lead at Google. Thank you, Alvaro. And Dalmo Cerny, Senior Manager, Machine Learning Engineering at Workday. Gentlemen, it has been a great panel today. Your perspectives and advice have been spot on, so thank you so much. I hope that we get a chance to talk again soon. And to everyone joining us today, thank you too. Join us again next week, when we will be talking about leading your workforce through AI transformation. That should be another great discussion. In the meantime, if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there, so check me out. I'm Kevin Crane. And check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of AI Talk. And until next time, I am Kevin Crane saying thanks for watching.